when Marvin Gaye was sleeping with his manager's wife. His manager found out. Instead of firing him, he made him the biggest star at Motown. There is a moment in the history of Motown Records that almost nobody talks about. A moment that happened behind closed doors, in a conversation between two men who had every reason to destroy each other, and who chose instead to do something that changed the course of American music. The year was 1962. The place was Detroit, and the two men were Harvey Fuqua, musician, producer, and one of the most connected figures in the early rhythm and blues world, and a 23-year-old singer from Washington, D.C., named Marvin Gaye Jr., who had arrived in Detroit 2 years earlier as Harvey Fuqua's protege, and who had, in the time since, done something that no protege is supposed to do. He had fallen in love with Harvey Fuqua's wife. Or more precisely, and the precision matters, because this story is complicated enough without the addition of inaccuracy. He had become involved with the woman who would become Harvey Fuqua's wife, Anna Gordy, Berry Gordy's sister, the most sophisticated, most connected, most formidable woman in the Motown orbit. He who was 17 years older than Marvin, and who had seen him clearly from the first moment he walked into the world she inhabited, and had decided, with the particular certainty of a woman who knew exactly what she was looking at, that what she was looking at was worth her attention. Harvey Fuqua had also decided that Anna Gordy was worth his attention. He had been pursuing her. He had intentions. He had, in the specific language of the era and the social world they all moved through, a claim. And Marvin Gaye, who had arrived in Detroit as Harvey's driver and occasional vocalist, and who owed Harvey Fuqua more than he could easily calculate. The introduction to the music world. The platform, the credibility that came from being associated with someone of Harvey's stature, had walked into the middle of that claim and established his own. What happened when Harvey found out is the part of the story that has been told in various ways by various people over the decades, none of whom were in the room when the conversation happened, and all of whom are reconstructing it from what they knew about the men involved and what they observed in the aftermath. The specific words are lost. The emotional temperature of the conversation is, in some sense, irretrievable. But the outcome is a matter of record, and the outcome is astonishing. Harvey Fuqua did not fire Marvin Gaye. He did not withdraw his support. He did not use the considerable influence he had accumulated in the Detroit music world to make Marvin's path forward more difficult. He did not do any of the things that a reasonable person, anticipating the consequences of discovering that a man he had mentored and elevated had become involved with the woman he was pursuing, would expect him to do. Instead, Harvey Fuqua went to Berry Gordy and told him that Marvin Gaye was the most talented artist he had ever heard, that whatever personal complications existed between them, and he was not specific about the nature of those complications, was not the kind of man who aired private difficulties in professional settings. Those complications were irrelevant to the question of what Marvin Gaye's voice was capable of and what it deserved. He told Berry Gordy to sign him. To understand why this is extraordinary, you need to understand who Harvey Fuqua was and what his endorsement meant. Harvey Fuqua had been a star in rhythm and blues for a decade before Marvin Gaye arrived in Detroit. He was the lead singer of the Moonglows, one of the most influential doo-wop groups of the 1950s, a group whose vocal sophistication and emotional depth had influenced virtually every black vocal group that came after them. He was connected to Leonard Chess of Chess Records. He had relationships across the music industry that gave his endorsements the weight of someone who had earned the right to his opinions through genuine experience and genuine achievement. When Harvey Fuqua told Berry Gordy to sign someone, Berry Gordy listened. But here is the part that requires the longest view to fully appreciate. Harvey Fuqua's decision to advocate for Marvin Gaye, to set aside whatever personal injury he felt and evaluate the situation through the lens of what was actually best, what the music deserved, what the talent in front of him required, was not just an act of professionalism or strategic calculation. It was, in the deepest sense, an act of generosity that would define the entire trajectory of American popular music for the next 2 decades. Because without Harvey Fuqua's endorsement, without the specific credibility that Harvey's support gave Marvin in the Motown world, without the introduction to the infrastructure and the relationships and the specific creative environment that Hitsville, USA, represented, without all of that, Marvin Gaye might have remained what he had been when he arrived in Detroit. A talented young man from Washington, D.C., with a remarkable voice and no platform adequate to what that voice was capable of. What's going on might not have existed. Let's get it on might not have existed. I heard it through the grapevine. Sexual healing, mercy mercy me. Here my dear. The entire extraordinary body of work that Marvin Gaye produced over the next 22 years of his life might have taken a completely different form, or might not have reached the world in the way that it reached the world, if Harvey Fuqua had made the more predictable, more understandable, more human choice of using his influence against rather than for the man who had complicated his personal life. He chose to understand Marvin Gaye's side of this story, to understand what the relationship with Berry Gordy actually was and what it meant in the context of his life at that moment. You need to go back to where Marvin was when he arrived in Detroit in 1960. He was 21 years old. He had grown up in Washington, D.C., in the house of a Pentecostal minister whose relationship to love had been, from Marvin's earliest memory, complicated and conditional and sometimes violent. He had learned, in that house, that the warmth and the safety and the unconditional acceptance that children need in order to develop a stable sense of themselves as lovable and worthy of care were things that arrived unpredictably, intermittently, always shadowed by the possibility of their withdrawal. His mother Alberta had been the exception. The source of warmth in that house, the person whose love for Marvin was as close to unconditional as anything he had experienced. But even Alberta's love, as real and as sustaining as it was, could not fully compensate for the specific damage that growing up under his father's authority had done. The need, the deep, persistent, aching need for someone who saw him completely and chose him anyway, without conditions and without the threat of withdrawal. That need was real and large, and not adequately addressed by the circumstances of his early life. Berry Gordy saw him completely. From the first moment she encountered him in the Motown world, she saw what was there. The voice, yes, but also the sensitivity and the hunger and the specific quality of emotional intelligence that made Marvin Gaye both the artist he was and the complicated, difficult to love person he was simultaneously. She saw it and she chose him. For a man who had grown up in Marvin's house, this was not a small thing. This was, in some fundamental sense, the thing he had been looking for since the first time he understood what he was looking for. A woman of substance and sophistication and genuine power who looked at him without the mediation of the music industry's assessment or the public's enthusiasm, who saw the private man rather than the emerging performer, and who decided that the private man was worth her time and her heart. He was not calculating. He was not making a strategic decision to become involved with Berry Gordy's sister because of the professional advantages such an involvement might provide. He was 21 years old, and he had been seen by someone for the first time in his life in the specific way that he most needed to be seen, and he responded to that seeing the way people respond when what they have most needed finally arrives. He fell in love with her. Harvey Fuqua's discovery of this, the specific moment, the conversation, the way Harvey processed what he had learned and what he decided to do with it. These are the details that are lost to history, that exist only in the accounts of people who were adjacent to the events and are reconstructing from incomplete information. What is not lost is the decision that Harvey made and the reasoning that, by all accounts, lay behind it. Harvey Fuqua was, above all else, a man of the music. He had spent his entire adult life in service of a particular understanding of what music was for, and what it required from the people who made it. He had heard enough great voices and worked with enough great artists to understand that genuine talent, the specific, rare, irreplaceable combination of voice and vision and emotional depth that produces music that matters, was not something to be wasted or suppressed or redirected for the sake of personal grievance, however legitimate that grievance might be. He had heard Marvin Gaye sing. He knew what was there. And he made the decision that the music mattered more than the injury. That whatever complicated, painful, humanly messy thing had happened between them on the personal level was less important than what would happen to American music if Marvin Gaye's voice found the platform it deserved. That his job, not just as a professional, but as someone who believed in music the way that certain people believe in things that are larger than themselves, was to make sure that voice reached the world, regardless of the personal cost. Berry Gordy signed Marvin Gaye to Motown Records in 1961. The first few years were not the years of landmark albums and social revolution. They were the years of learning, of understanding how the Motown machine worked and what it required and how to operate within it, while also slowly, carefully finding the space to become something more than what the machine's immediate commercial needs demanded. Marvin had musical ambitions that went well beyond the Motown format. He wanted to be a jazz singer. He wanted to make the kind of sophisticated, adult music that he had grown up listening to. The Nat King Cole records, the Frank Sinatra records, the music that treated its audience as adults capable of handling complexity and ambiguity and the full range of human emotional experience, rather than the simplified, 3-minute version that pop radio required. Berry Gordy was not interested in Marvin the jazz singer. He was interested in Marvin the soul singer, the R&B hitmaker. The voice that could reach the broadest possible audience with the most commercially viable possible product. He put Marvin in the machine and the machine produced hits. Stubborn Kind of Fellow, Hitchhike, Pride and Joy. And the hits validated Gordy's judgment and made everyone involved a great deal of money and kept the machine running. Anna watched all of it. She and Marvin had married in 1963. She 37, he 24. And the marriage was, from the beginning, a complicated thing that contained within it both genuine love and genuine misalignment. Anna was a woman of the world in ways that Marvin was still becoming a man of the world. She had seen more, knew more, understood the music industry and its particular cruelties with a clarity that Marvin, still young enough to believe in the purity of his artistic vision, had not yet fully acquired. She believed in him. This was not in question, not something that the complications of their marriage ever fully obscured. She believed in what his voice was capable of and what his artistic vision, if allowed to develop fully, would produce. She had seen it from the beginning, before the hits and the Grammy nominations and the critical recognition. She had seen it when he was 21 years old and Harvey Fuqua's driver, and the music was still entirely potential rather than achievement. Her belief sustained him through the years, when Gordy's commercial demands and Marvin's artistic ambitions were in maximum tension. The years when Marvin was making hits that he did not fully believe in while carrying inside him the music he actually wanted to make. Anna understood the frustration. She had the specific understanding of someone who had watched the industry function from the inside and who knew, without illusion, both what it could give and what it could not. Harvey Fuqua, meanwhile, had moved deeper into the Motown structure. He had become a producer and an executive, working within the organization that his original endorsement had helped shape. The personal complications between him and Marvin existed alongside the professional relationship, not comfortably, not without tension, but with the pragmatic mutual accommodation that professional environments require when people who have complicated personal histories must nonetheless work together toward shared goals. He and Anna had not married. The relationship that Harvey had been pursuing when Marvin arrived in his life had not developed in the direction Harvey had intended. Anna had made her choice. Harvey had, in the specific way of someone who is both hurt and honest enough to acknowledge that the talent he championed was real regardless of the personal cost. Gone on. The years that followed. The hits, the What's Going On battle with Gordy. The transformation of Marvin Gaye from hitmaker to artist of genuine historical importance were the years in which Harvey Fuqua's decision was vindicated so completely and so publicly that the vindication itself became part of the story of what the decision had meant. What's Going On was the proof. The album that nobody at Motown wanted, that Berry Gordy called the worst record he had ever heard, that Marvin had threatened to walk away from the label over. The album that Rolling Stone would eventually call the greatest ever made. That album existed because Harvey Fuqua had looked at a 23-year-old singer who had complicated his personal life and decided that the music mattered more than the injury. The most important album in the history of popular music was made possible, in part, by an act of generosity from a man who had every human reason to withhold it. Anna Gordy Gaye lived until 2020. She died at 94, having outlived Marvin by 36 years. Having watched the legacy of the man she had chosen develop into something that exceeded even the extraordinary expectations she had held for it from the beginning. She had known when she was a woman in her late 30s watching a 21-year-old sing that what she was hearing was something the world needed. She had been right. Harvey Fuqua died in 2010 at the age of 80. He had continued to work in music for decades after the Motown years, had maintained connections throughout the industry, had lived long enough to see the full arc of what his decision in 1962 had produced. Whether he made peace with the personal complications of that story, whether the professional vindication of his choice to advocate for Marvin was adequate compensation for whatever the choice had cost him personally, is not something that the public record makes clear. What the public record makes clear is what he chose, and what his choice made possible. Marvin Gaye was not supposed to be a Motown artist. He was a young man from Washington, D.C., with a voice and no platform, brought to Detroit by a man who would have had every reason not to open that particular door. The door was opened anyway. The music that came through it changed everything. The man who opened the door had been hurt by the man he was opening it for. He opened it anyway, and the world, which had no idea what was happening behind closed doors in Detroit in 1962, has been living with the consequences of that generosity ever since. In every note of What's Going On, in every breath of Let's Get It On, in every moment of music that Marvin Gaye made in the 22 years between Harvey Fuqua's decision and April 1, 1984. The music that almost did not happen. The music that exists because a man chose, against the grain of what anyone would have expected from him, to put the art above the injury. The music that the world cannot imagine not having. That is what Harvey Fuqua gave us. Not intentionally, not with any knowledge of what the gift would eventually contain, but completely, without reservation, in the most complicated, most human, most improbable way imaginable. He gave us Marvin Gaye. If this story moved you, if you felt something hearing about a generosity that changed the world without anyone knowing it was happening, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the greatest things we do are often the hardest ones, the ones that cost us something we did not expect to pay. Leave a comment telling us, what does Marvin Gaye's music mean to you? Ring that notification bell so you never miss another story about the legends who changed music forever. We will see you in the next one.